August 1st, 1943, a hot, heavy night in Harlem, New York. The air wasn't just warm, it was thick, it was tense, it was waiting. You could feel it, a current running beneath the pavement, through the brick walls, in the very pulse of the neighborhood. A pressure cooker, and tonight the lid was about to blow sky high. This is the story of a single gunshot, a story of a riot that shook a city and the one man who stood in the center of the storm and commanded it to stop. This is the story of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson and the night he stared down the mayor of New York City and won. To truly understand the earthquake of August 1st, you have to feel the ground shifting for years before. This was World War II. Our boys, black sons, brothers, fathers from Harlem were over there. They were fighting in the mud of Italy, in the skies over Germany, on beaches with names they couldn't pronounce, all for the promise of freedom. They wore the uniform of the United States Army, Navy, Air Force with a pride that was hard-won. They were heroes overseas. But when those trains pulled into New York, when those soldiers stepped onto the platform in their olive drabs, their medals gleaming, something cruel and familiar happened. The city, their own city, stripped that heroism away. Boy, they were called boy by white police officers. They were denied a seat at a lunch counter. They were told to go around to the back door. The very freedom they bled for in Europe and the Pacific was a cruel joke on the streets of their own hometown. And Harlem, oh, Harlem felt it all. It absorbed every insult, every humiliation, every ounce of that returning rage. The neighborhood was bursting, overcrowded apartments where families lived on top of each other. Jobs were scarce. Rent was high, and patrolling these stressed, vibrant streets was a police force that didn't see a community. They saw a problem, they saw a territory to be controlled. Patrolmen didn't walk their beats with a nod and a smile, they walked with a swagger, a nightstick tapping against a palm, a gaze that looked right through the people they were supposed to serve. The violence was quiet and constant and official. A beating in an alley that never made the papers, an arrest for looking the wrong way, a shakedown of a black-owned business for the crime of being successful. It was a slow, suffocating pressure, and in the middle of it all was a man who understood power, real power. Not the kind on a piece of paper, but the kind that lives in the loyalty of people. His name was Ellsworth Johnson, but the world knew him as Bumpy. Bumpy Johnson. By 1943, he was 36 years old, a legend already woven into the fabric of Harlem. His story was written in scars and whispers. He'd done time, he'd survived wars with mob titans like Dutch Schultz, he'd built an empire in the shadows. But to the people of Harlem, he was something more. He was a fixer, he was a shield. When a corrupt cop demanded a protection fee from a shopkeeper on 135th Street, that shopkeeper might whisper Bumpy's name, and the demand would suddenly vanish. When a slumlord tried to throw a mother and her children into the cold street for missing a single week's rent, a visit from one of Bumpy's men would ensure the landlord suddenly found his heart. Bumpy Johnson operated outside the law, but in a neighborhood where the law was often the biggest predator, he became the unofficial justice. He walked down Lenox Avenue and people didn't look away in fear. They nodded. They said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson." It was a respect earned in blood and action, but even Bumpy, with all his street-smart foresight, could not predict the exact spark. He couldn't know it would happen at the Braddock Hotel on 126th Street at 7:30 on a warm August evening. Inside the Braddock's lobby, a scene was unfolding. A white police officer, Patrolman James Collins, was trying to arrest a black woman named Margie Polite. Her crime, she had argued with the hotel manager. She decomplained about being overcharged. It was a loud disagreement, nothing more. But Officer Collins didn't see a frustrated woman. He saw disorder. He saw defiance. And he moved in, grabbing her arm, twisting it, his voice a harsh command lost in her cries of pain. Watching this was a young man in a United States Army uniform, Private Robert Bandy. 26 years old, he was home on leave. Just days before, he might have been in a foxhole dreaming of this moment of home, of peace, of normalcy. And here he was in the lobby of a Harlem hotel watching a woman being manhandled. Something in him, the soldier who fought against tyranny overseas, could not stand by. He stepped forward. His voice was firm but respectful. "Sir, you're hurting her. You don't need to be so rough." Officer Collins stopped. He turned. He looked at the uniform and he saw only the color of the skin beneath it. His lip curled. "You mind your own business, boy. This doesn't concern you." The word boy hung in the air. It was a slap. A deliberate erasure of the uniform, of the service, of the manhood. Robert Bandy stood straighter. The training, the discipline, it was all there, but so was the dignity. "I am not a boy," he said, his voice low and clear. "I am a soldier in the United States Army. And you are hurting that woman." What happened next was a blur of motion and panic. Witnesses would tell different stories. Collins would later claim Bandy attacked him, but the crowd in the lobby saw the truth. They saw the officer's hand go to his holster. They saw the flash of metal. They heard the deafening, monstrous bang of a police revolver firing in a crowded room. Private Robert Bandy's soldier, Harlem's son, clutched his shoulder. A red stain, dark and shocking, bloomed across his army-issued jacket over his heart. He stumbled, his eyes wide with more shock than pain, and collapsed to the dirty hotel floor. The sound of the gunshot didn't fade. It seemed to amplify, to echo out of the hotel lobby, down the hallway, through the front doors and into the Harlem evening. A white cop had just shot a black soldier in his uniform in front of witnesses. A terrible silence followed for perhaps 10 seconds. Then a wail, a scream, the shouted words, "He shot him, they shot a soldier." Officer Collins was on his radio, his voice frantic, calling for backup, lying through his teeth about an attack. But the truth was already escaping, moving faster than any police radio signal. It traveled by foot, by shouted alarm, by a primal telegraph of outrage. It moved from person to person, block to block, with a chilling, unified message: "They shot one of ours." By 8:00 p.m., a crowd had gathered outside the Braddock. It wasn't a mob, not yet. It was a gathering of the hurt, the confused, the angry, 50 people. Then 100 neighbors came out of their apartments. Shopkeepers locked their doors and joined the crowd. They stared at the hotel, at the police cars now screaming to the scene. They saw Robert Bandy being carried out on a stretcher, his uniform stained, his eyes closed. The crowd murmured, a low, dangerous sound. By 9:00 p.m., the murmuring had become a roar. The crowd was 500 strong, then 1,000. The grief was curdling, turning into something hotter and sharper. The first bottle arced through the air, shattering against the brick wall near a policeman's head. It was a signal, and then Harlem erupted. It wasn't a random explosion of violence. It was targeted, precise, and born of a deep historical memory. The rage did not turn inward. Black-owned businesses, the barber shops, the restaurants, the record stores had their lights off, their doors locked, untouched. But the white-owned stores, the ones that were known to overcharge, to refuse hire, to treat their Harlem customers with contempt, they became the focus. Plate glass windows exploded in cascades of glittering, angry sound. Clothing stores, furniture stores, pawn shops, they were invaded, not for loot but for catharsis. Goods were dragged into the street and set ablaze in great symbolic bonfires. Police cars that ventured too far into the side streets were surrounded. They were rocked, their windows smashed, until officers fled on foot, leaving their vehicles to be overturned, their radios ripped out, their blue and red lights still flashing uselessly at the sky. The NYPD tried to form lines to hold the main avenues, but they were insects against a tide. Outnumbered, terrified, they fell back. Their batons were useless, their guns a threat that only poured gasoline on the fire. By 10:00 p.m., the police commissioner himself was on the phone to Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's residence. The report was stark and simple and terrifying. "Sir, we have lost control of Harlem." Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, the little flower, a man of progressive reputation, now faced an abyss. He listened to the reports of fires, of chaos, of his police force in retreat. His mind raced through the options. More police, they were already failing. Negotiation with whom? There was no leader, just a sea of fury. He saw only one path to restore order, a path of overwhelming, terrifying force. He picked up a direct line to the armory. His order was grim and final: mobilize the National Guard, have them ready to deploy into Harlem by midnight. Troops were roused from their bunks, trucks were loaded, rifles were issued. The plan was simple and brutal: a military occupation of a New York City neighborhood. They would march in, impose a curfew at gunpoint, and arrest anyone on sight. History told them how this ended: in blood, in broken bodies, in a trauma that would last for generations. The clock ticked past 11:00 p.m. Harlem was a landscape of fire and shadow. The air tasted of smoke and broken dreams. And in the midst of this hellscape, a dark Cadillac pulled quietly to the corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. The door opened. Bumpy Johnson stepped out. He was immaculate as always: a tailored suit, a sharp hat. He didn't look like a man in a war zone. He looked like a man on his way to a board meeting. But his eyes took in everything: the flames reflecting in the puddles of broken glass, the terrified faces of families peering from windows. The young men, his people, throwing their lifetimes of frustration at a system that refused to see them. His closest lieutenant, a man named Red, was at his elbow, face tight with fear. "Boss, you can't be here. It's gone crazy. The word is the guard is coming. Tanks, Bumpy. They're bringing in tanks at midnight. We gotta get you out." Bumpy didn't look at him. He kept scanning the street, his face a mask of calm calculation. He saw the tragic, self-destructive truth: his people were tearing apart their own home. And the city fathers, they were just waiting for it to get worse. They wanted it to get worse. A burned-out Harlem was a Harlem they could bulldoze. A riot was an excuse for a massacre. This wasn't a victory. This was a suicide and a trap. He made a decision. It was instantaneous and absolute. "Red," Bumpy said, his voice so calm it cut through the surrounding chaos, "get me a bullhorn, a loud one, and keep this car right here." Red stared at him. "A bullhorn, boss? They'll kill you out there." "They're throwing bricks. They're my people," Bumpy said, finally turning his gaze to Red. There was no fear in it, only a steely resolve. "Now get me the bullhorn." 5 minutes later, Bumpy Johnson stood on the broad hood of his Cadillac. Red leaned on the horn, a long, desperate, bleeding wail that fought against the noise of the riot. People turned. They saw the car. They saw the figure standing tall atop it, silhouetted by the orange glow of a burning building behind him. A ripple went through the crowd, a whisper. "That's Bumpy. It's Mr. Johnson." The throwing slowed. The shouting near him died down. A space cleared around the car. Hundreds of eyes, wide with anger and adrenaline, now fixed on him. Bumpy raised the heavy metal bullhorn to his lips. He took a breath. And when he spoke, his voice was not the shout of a rabble-rouser. It was the firm, commanding, familiar voice of the neighborhood's patriarch. It carried, "Listen to me." The crowd flinched at the volume, but they listened. "I know why you are out here. I know what you are feeling. Look at me, I am angry too." He let that settle. He saw heads nod in the flickering light. "They took Robert Bandy, a soldier, a man who fought for this country, and they shot him down like a dog in the street. For what? For speaking, for being a man. I know this rage. I feel it in MYBONES." He was speaking their truth. He was validating them. He was one of them. "BUT." He boomed, and the word was a hammer. "But you look around you now. Look at what you are doing. You are breaking the windows of your grocery store. You are burning the furniture from your living room. This is your neighborhood. These streets, these buildings, this is all we have." He pointed a long finger at a group of young men holding bricks. "And what are they doing?" He swung his arm to point at the distant, hesitant police line glowing under the streetlights. "They are waiting. They are just standing there, watching you burn your own future. They are letting you do it, because when you are done, when there is nothing left but ashes, then they will march in with their rifles and their tanks, and they will say, 'Look at these animals. We told you so. They need to be put down.'" The crowd was utterly silent now. The only sounds were the crackle of distant fires and his amplified voice. "They want this destruction. They need you to give them a reason. That next brick you throw, that next fire you light, that is the excuse they are praying for. They will use it to come in here, and they will not arrest you. They will shoot you. And when your mothers are crying over your bodies tomorrow, the newspapers will say the NAACP started a riot. They will say you brought it on yourselves." You could hear a sob from the crowd. A woman's voice cried out, "What do we do, Bumpy?" "They shot Robert." Bumpy's voice softened just a fraction. It became direct, personal. "What do? You go home right now, you check on your children. You hold your family close, you protect what is yours, you leave the streets, and you let me handle this." "How?" a man shouted, voice raw. "How you gonna handle it?" A slow, cold smile touched Bumpy Johnson's lips. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards and knew it. "I am going to pick up my telephone," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, deadly calm that the bullhorn projected perfectly. "And I am going to call Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. And I am going to tell him that if the police who did this are not gone by sunrise, if a single one of those cruel, violent men still wears a badge tomorrow, then the next time this happens, I will not be standing on a car telling you to go home." He paused. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. "I will be standing right beside you, leading the way." The effect was electric and immediate. It was as if a spell had been broken. The defiant anger didn't vanish, but it was redirected. The target was no longer their own neighborhood. It was City Hall. The people looked at each other. They looked at the burning stores. Shame mixed with their rage. Slowly, in ones and twos, then in small groups, they began to disperse. They dropped their bricks. They turned their backs on the fires. They drifted into the dark doorways and side streets from which they came. Bumpy Johnson stood on his car, watching his people obey him, not out of fear of him, but out of trust. He had given them a better enemy and a better path. By 11:45 p.m., the heart of the riot was still. The streets were empty, littered with the debris of rebellion, but silent save for the sigh of dying flames. At midnight, the first trucks carrying National Guard troops rolled cautiously into Harlem. The soldiers jumped out, rifles at the ready, expecting a battle. They found ghost streets, smoldering ruins. An eerie, profound quiet. The commander radioed back to headquarters, baffled. "Sir, the riot is over. The streets are clear. I don't understand it, but there's no one here to fight." In his ornate office at City Hall, Mayor LaGuardia received this news with stunned relief and deep confusion. It made no sense. Mobs don't just dissolve. As he pondered this minor miracle, his private line rang. His secretary's voice was hesitant, confused. "Mr. Mayor, it's a Mr. Johnson on the line, Ellsworth Johnson. He insists on speaking with you." LaGuardia froze. He knew the name. Every politician, every judge, every police captain knew that name. Bumpy Johnson was a fact of life in New York, a problem to be managed, a shadow to be ignored. He did not make phone calls to the mayor. This was unprecedented. He took a breath, put him through. There was a click and then a voice. It was smooth, cultured, deceptively calm. "Mr. Mayor, this is Bumpy Johnson. I trust you are having an interesting evening." LaGuardia bristled at the tone. "Mr. Johnson, I am aware of who you are. What is the purpose of this call?" "The purpose? I called to give you your report since your police seem to have lost the ability to see what is right in front of them. The riot is over. The streets of Harlem are quiet. Your National Guard can go back to their beds. You're welcome." The mayor's face flushed. "I did not request your assistance, Mr. Johnson. The situation is being handled by the proper authorities." "Is it?" Bumpy's voice lost its polite sheen just a little. "Because from where I am standing, the proper authorities were the ones who started this. Officer James Collins, badge number 1842. He is the man who shot Robert Bandy. He is the match that lit this city on fire tonight. And I hear he is merely suspended, sent home with pay to wait for this to blow over." "That is standard procedure during an investigation," LaGuardia began, his political auto-response kicking in. "Suspended." The word exploded through the phone line, sharp as the gunshot in the Braddock Hotel. Bumpy's voice was no longer calm. It was a razor of controlled fury. "Let me explain your situation to you, Mr. Mayor. You have a neighborhood that is a powder keg. You have police officers who are not peacekeepers, they are occupiers. And tonight you almost had a war. I stopped that war, me, not you, not your commissioner, me. I stood in the street and I sent 10,000 angry people home. Now you owe me." LaGuardia was speechless. No one spoke to him this way. Bumpy continued, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "Here is what happens now. Officer James Collins is not suspended. He is finished, fired, his badge is taken, his pension is gone, and he is charged publicly. And he is not alone. I have a list, 8 other officers in that precinct. Their names are in my hand, men known for their brutality, for their cruelty. They are cancers. And by noon tomorrow, they will all be gone, dismissed from the force, every last one. You are in no position to make demands, LaGuardia spluttered, finding his voice. I am the mayor of New York City. And I am the man who just saved your city from a massacre, Bumpy shot back, his tone final. This is not a demand, Mayor, it is a transaction. You remove the infection and I will guarantee your peace in Harlem. I will keep the powder keg from blowing. But if you refuse, if you protect those men, then the next time a cop lays a hand on one of my people, I will not make a phone call. I will not give a speech. I will open the armory myself. And the war that starts then will be one your National Guard cannot stop. You have 72 hours. The clock starts now. The line went dead with a decisive click. Fiorello LaGuardia sat in his leather chair, the receiver still in his hand, listening to the dial tone hum. His hands were trembling. He was a man of law, of order, of due process. What he had just heard was an ultimatum from the underworld. To capitulate was unthinkable. To ignore it was to risk an unthinkable bloodbath. He saw it clearly now. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a gangster. He was a general, and Harlem was his sovereign territory. For 3 days, the mayor wrestled with demons. He met with his police commissioner. He reviewed the confidential files on the officers Bumpy had named. To his horror, the files were thick with complaints, brutality allegations, racism charges, all buried, all unsubstantiated. Bumpy's list was accurate. These men were poison. The political cost would be enormous. The police unions would scream. The newspapers would accuse him of caving to mob rule. But the cost of another riot, a riot led, not just erupting, that cost was the city itself. On the morning of August 4, 1943, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia made his choice. He called in the police commissioner and gave the orders himself, quietly, without ceremony or press conference. That afternoon, a small article appeared on page 7 of the New York Times. A mere 3 paragraphs. It read, 8 NYPD officers dismissed following internal review. The police commissioner announced today the dismissal of several officers from the 28th precinct following an internal investigation into conduct violations. The dismissals are effective immediately. No names were listed, no details given. It was a bureaucratic whisper, but in Harlem they didn't need the newspaper, they had their own network. The word spread, Collins was gone, the others were gone. The worst of the bullies had been swept from the streets. And everyone from the shopkeeper on 125th Street to the beat cop now walking a more cautious patrol knew who was truly responsible. It wasn't the internal review, it was the mayor's conscience, it was Bumpy. The legend of that night solidified into fact. Bumpy Johnson had faced down the system, and for once the system had blinked. He had proven that real power doesn't flow from the top down. It grows from the ground up. From the loyalty of the people, from the courage to stand between them and the storm. Years later, in 1965, when the towering figure of Malcolm X was assassinated and New York trembled on the brink of a grief-stricken fury, the powers that be faced the same old problem. Who could control Harlem? Who could speak to the people? The police commissioner didn't call the new mayor first. He picked up the phone and called an older, graying Bumpy Johnson. They asked him, practically begged him to help keep the peace, because they knew the undeniable truth. They knew who the real mayor of Harlem had always been. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968 of heart failure. His funeral was a Harlem event unlike any other. The streets were lined not with hundreds but with thousands. Silent, respectful mourning. They weren't mourning a crime boss. They were mourning a guardian, a complicated, flawed, but unwavering protector. A man who looked at the most powerful city in the world and said, "You will not crush my people." So August 1st, 1943 is more than a date, it is a lesson. It is the night a riot died not with a bang, but with the commanding words of one man. It is the night a telephone call became a weapon more powerful than a battalion. It is the story of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the man who stopped a war with his voice, and in doing so taught everyone where true power really resides.